We share information now. That doesn't take place in many other counties, nor when situations arise do a lot of women know who they can call for help. I've been in situations personally where I sat in my car and I tried to figure out, where do you go if you need shelter? So from Gwinnett County, I called Gwinnett, I called Clayton, and I called Fulton, and all of them were out of beds. The one that did have a bed said that I could not bring my children. Then my older children weren't allowed, so they said, if you bring your one child, we only have one place for you, and that was in another county that was not even the counties that were mentioned. So there is a problem. And I find myself to be very well connected, with knowing what's going on, trying to be an informed citizen. So for me, as an informed, engaged community person, not being able to get the resources and help, I cannot fathom what a woman feels. I know the law. I can't imagine how terrifying that must feel. So without, all of the beautiful, eloquent words, that is why we need a task force. Oftentimes, because of the safety of the women that are involved, I've worked with Barbara Gibson on numerous occasions. And when we bring gifts to the Women's Resource Center, or when we bring things to the Resource Center, it's very exclusive because they don't want people to know where they are, for the purposes of the woman being harmed. But in that same regard, because of the exclusivity, then how do women who are in need of help know where to go unless they know where to go? Is that making any sense? Unless they know Barbara, unless they've heard of it, unless they're aware of what's going on, how would they ever find these agencies? So what tends to happen is that they connect themselves with grassroots people like Tamika Pugh, like Sabrina McKenzie, like Rhonda Thompson, like many of the others who we've already formed alliances with. We already have had our meetings together to say we are partnering. So the grassroots agencies are on the same page. We're partnering, we're sharing resources, but we cannot do it alone. We truly need the help because many of those agencies don't have the funding that you have. They're not backed by the government. They don't get checks from the state. They don't have those resources that you have tangibly accessible to you. They just have a passion, a desire, a heart, and compassion. And if the truth were to be told, many of them were formulated because they were abused themselves. And they found themselves in a position that they needed help and could not find it. And so what we're doing is partnering, and what we desire to do is to partner with you so that, again, these resources can become accessible to women who have need of them. The Honorable Representative Billy Mitchell has come into the room, and we are here because of his graciousness. Would you like to greet the people or say something, sir?
I don't have to. I have to.
Yes, you have to.
I think we got all the right folk in the room to get some things done. Probably one of the most powerful public servants on this side of heaven, Representative Carter, is here. But I will tell you this, this is certainly an issue that we need to get our hands around. And I see Representative Casas' wife is here too. Real power in that family. I can tell you, his wife. But this is an issue we most certainly have to get our hands on. No question about it. We have several pieces of legislation that we have been deliberating upon that I would love to see come to fruition, and we can do that with the help of folk like you here. I always say that we get the kind of government that we deserve, and when we don't get involved, get engaged, get informed on issues like this, they kind of proliferate. And so I'm glad to see that we've got some of the finest folks here to be able to do some real good things about what is a very important issue. I will tell you the two most important jobs that we as human beings have is that of being a parent and that of being a spouse or a partner, and yet we get no formal education on how to go about doing those jobs. Those are the two most important jobs we have. in your view that there will be maybe 80–90% of your happiness or frustration in this world will become as a result of what kind of parent or partner or spouse you'll be. And a lot of the issues that when we talk about domestic violence can be eradicated if we just have some formal training on how we should go about dealing and interacting with each other, with partners, with spouses, and the like. But I'm glad to be able to host this, and as I said, with this distinguished panel and some great public service, anything that I could do for the cause, well, no question about that. I'm here to serve as always. Thank you so very much, Pastor McKenzie.
Thank you, sir.
Where's my honorarium? I just
Each of them has a check for you.
Your spaghetti is over here.
At 3 p.m.
I see.
All right. It's in the legislative building across the hall. As he already mentioned, Representative Doreen Carter, thank you so much for being here. And Doreen has been active even before she was in office, and so it's always good to see people who are engaged, and it's not just about politics or the dome, but who work with communities. So we really appreciate you being present, Doreen. And Representative Abel Mabel should be on her way as well. I'm going to allow you all to introduce yourselves. I'm just giving you an opportunity to eat. Don't feel rushed. In the interim, I'm going to continue sharing some of the items on the agenda that we want to discuss. Once again, the purpose for having you to come is because there's some things that we feel like we can really truly do if the leaders come. Each of you represent hundreds, if not thousands, of constituents in your places. The Women's Resource Center, you see hundreds of women come through there. The director of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Sorry, I don't know your name, but I mean, you are just one of the pillars here in the state of Georgia, and so we honor your presence here as well as Belisa, who represents the Latino community. And one of the things that we've been sharing is that we know domestic violence goes without boundaries. It knows no boundaries. It doesn't know a socioeconomic status. It doesn't know a color. It doesn't know a gender. It just is domestic violence. It just hurts. It just kills. And so to not have diversity represented in the task force would be a detriment to us, because we know that many of the other cultural communities, whether it be Latino, whether it be Indian, I think they actually suffer greater, because oftentimes it's a part of their custom to be submissive to their men, and they're not aware of some of the liberties or some of the laws that can benefit them when they're here. We went to the task force meeting they had here on the Fulton County steps during Victims Violence Week, and there was a young lady there that gave a testimony that was almost unbelievable. You would have thought that we were still in slavery days, the way her husband was treating her. And it was her whole community. She mentioned to us, I believe she was Indian, and her whole community, she said she went to her community to get help, and she was excommunicated from the entire community, because in that community, almost like the African American community, what happens in this house, what? It stays in this house, and you don't share. So there's no protection at work, there's no protection at school, there's no protection on your job. You're just supposed to be submissive. And I'm grateful that she found the courage to go outside of her community to get help. But what she told us, in us soliciting her to try to go back in, is that they won't let her back in the community at all. So now she's forced to live without a community that she grew up in, a culture that she knows and she loves, just to have a peace of mind, just to have a life without abuse. So we know that there is a great work that has to be done in diversity. And until we have people who understand the language, understand the politics, understands the economy, understands the culture, somebody that looks like them, then they will continue to have a great disparity of challenges. The other thing that's going on in many of the Latino communities, as well as some of the immigrants, is right now a lot of immigrants are scared to come forward because they're being locked up because of the new legislation and the new orders that Trump has put in place. And so they're being taken advantage of by people actually going into their community, raping, I'm going to say that again, raping their children, and they will not report it. Going and meeting them at their supermarkets, the farmer's market, and following them home and robbing them, the whole house. And they told me they would not dare report it because they are afraid to be deported. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And you, I know that you are the leaders who are able to accomplish this great work. We would like to, as a task force, be able to impact several spheres of influence. I call them the 7 spiritual mountains. They are government, entertainment, media, arts, education, religion, is there one more? And business. I'm going to say that again, the 7 spiritual mountains. Those are the entities, the spheres of influence that we would like this task force to impact. It's government, religion, arts, entertainment, education, business, and media. Okay? And how are we going to do that? I'm definitely, this is a leadership meeting. This is more of a think tank. This is not a dictatorship. So I am open to your wisdom. Many of you at this table have been doing this longer than me. You've been seeing many women longer than me, and my involvement truly came because my sister was murdered. I often say, you don't call yourself to an assignment, but God calls you. You don't choose yourself, but God chooses you. And when that happened, on that day, I was chosen. I did not know when my sister was murdered at the time that our family had gone through a systemic evil of abuse generationally. I did not realize it because abuse was just so common in our family. I remember seeing my mother come home with black eyes, and I mean, abuse today seems pretty cute. What I mean is that there's a young lady by the name of Shekinah. You guys, I'll spare you. You may not know hip hop, but she is a friend of Tiny, who is the wife of T.I. You may know T.I. He's a very popular rapper in Atlanta. And she was beat up this week and went and posted it on social media. Now, I'm talking about women who have millions of followers. If you look at their social media, they're very well known. They're all over VH1. They're all over television, and very well known. So Shekinah went to Instagram and posted, "Look what he did to me. He beat me up. Please pray for me." And I reached out to Shekinah because oftentimes when you have people who are in celebrity instances, they don't usually get help, and it's a part of the genre, it's a part of the custom, it's a part of the whole hip-hop thing. It's known as cute. And I said that to say, when Shekinah did it, although she was reaching out for help, when we were going through abuse back in the day with our families, that would have never happened. You would have never told. So when I went and I said, "Mom, why is your eye hanging out?" I fell. I remember fleeing South Carolina, her putting us in a car, and as we were driving to come back to New York, the man shooting the tires out and us swerving, trying to get away from him. And I probably was in the 1st grade at that time. And still, even then, I did not realize that was abuse. That was just what happened to my mother because that's what he did. That's what boyfriends do, right? So when we get to New York, again, being in abusive relationships and watching my mother have these relationships that I just did not know were abuse, even to the point when we came out as a family. I'll say I came out because I just was like, "Y'all are crazy." My mother was like, "That is not abuse. Why won't you stay with this man? He pays the bills." So it's deep-seated and deep-rooted. There's a lot of work to be done, but I believe that as a community, I believe that as a task force, that we can infuse our resources into these different agencies, Shekinah being in the arts and entertainment, being a part of the media, utilizing the government to help us get into some of those media outlets who can share information, having trainings, having sessions, having teachings. If it had not been for the Interdenominational Theological Center, going through chaplaincy and going through counseling, today I still would not be calling emotional abuse, or what happened to my mother abuse. Is that not insane? It wasn't until somebody sat with me and said, "You're in an abusive relationship." And I was like, "No, he doesn't beat me up all the time." And I began to make excuses for him, and she said, "That's one of the symptoms and the signs of abuse. is the fact that you excuse the perpetrator. So nevertheless, getting into infusing our resources into these areas so that we can make a great change. How are we going to do that? At this time, I'm going to yield the floor to you to introduce, I'm going to yield the floor to the panelists to introduce themselves so that you can see some of the ways and some of the things that we can do as a task force to try to curb this violence and ultimately put an end to violence, or make it very, very difficult and very, very challenging and very, very ugly for those who desire to take the lives of other people. At this time, I'm going to yield the floor to the last panelist on my right.
Hi, I'm Jan Christensen. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Do you want me to say anything else, Sabrina, about what we do?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
what you do.
the Coalition is the federally designated domestic violence expert for the state of Georgia, which means that we receive federal funding to provide training and technical assistance and awareness to local domestic violence programs throughout the state. We're not a funder, we don't do direct services to victims, but we do outreach to programs and really help them to be able to provide better services to victims.
Awesome, thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Sheena Morris. I'm the Director of Policy and Community Engagement at the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm very happy to be here, many familiar faces, and just very glad to be here with you all today.
Okay, so we're standing when we're talking. Hey, good afternoon. I'm State Representative Doreen Carter. I represent House District 92, which covers parts of DeKalb and Rockdale. And I guess my little contribution to this conversation, we have a bill, HB 291, that didn't make it through the hopper this session, but because we're in a biennial, it's still alive, so it's a bill that'll come up next year. And basically, this bill would allow for people in the beauty industry, when they go to get their licenses, that they would take a training to be able to identify domestic violence. So, and it wouldn't be any additional cost to that professional, it would just be a part of their training. So we would have one more eye, one more ear, being able to identify a situation and maybe pass that on and could save another life. So it's HB 291, and I'm a co-sponsor on that bill, and Representative James Beverly, he's the sponsor. But what you can help us with is to maybe have some, is you go to the hair salon and say, hey, you familiar with this bill, or your barbershop, or you get your nails, or whatever, and then when we come back in session, helping us by calling the chairman of the committee where that bill is, and till we get a hearing. Ultimately, we want to get this bill passed, because we just think it's just another opportunity. So, thank you.
What's that bill number? HB
291.
Okay, awesome.
And Billy Mitchell, humble servant. That's who I am. You know, I will say, Pastor Sabrina, is that many of the solutions that I've heard, or the issues that would deal with this issue, talk about actions and remedies after the fact of domestic violence. And I will tell you, once getting emerged in this particular issue, I was just amazed to find out that most domestic violence happens between couples who know each other, very familiar with each other. They know them quite a bit. So one of the things that I would like to see us do, well, I tell you, we got another celebrity that just walked in here, Representative Ben Harvin. Wow. But in any event, one of the things that I would like to see us do is incorporate how do we interact with one another in some kind of curriculum so that we can avoid having domestic violence issues. You know, people, I have found it, yes, Sabrina, you know I am, you're going to have to give me that's enough sign when I talk to them. I'm just amazed that, you know, we come up with rules and remedies for parents and adults, And some of them are doing the absolute best that they know how to do. They just don't know how. When we talk about some of our schools that are in bad shape, failing schools, some of the parents of these students are actually doing the best that they know how to do. They just don't know, they don't have the tools to do something different. And I think that we need to face the fact that maybe we need to give them some more tools. We need to give them some more information on how to do it. And some of these young ladies think that it is appropriate to have their partner abuse them. I mean, some of them just think that that is part of being in a relationship. And then I would suggest to you that those are the kinds of examples that I'm talking about. They're doing the best that they know how to do. We need to combat that. So we're not talking about what do we do after they get abused.
Be proactive. Thank you.
Hey guys, I am Sergeant Richard Moen. I work with Clay County Sheriff's Office. I've been there approximately 21 years. I've been in the stalking unit twice. This is my second go around. We did some plainclothes stuff for a while, grow beards and hair and that kind of thing, which is what everybody wants to do. All the TV shows are about that, but this is actually the nuts and bolts of our environment, our society. If your partners cannot get along, then how can anybody get along? But that's something that I've been drawn to, and we spend eight hours a day. 8 turns into 18 doing this, but glad to be part of it. And, that's it for now. Thank you.
How you doing? Deputy Nola Carter, been at the Sheriff's Office 17 years. Bouncing around, warrants, stalking, a lot of TPOs, a lot of homes that we visit. And like I said, it comes down to parenting and knowing what to look for in relationships, because it's not explained. It goes to the cultures, and it's a whole bunch of other items. When you get to talking to people, you actually see most of them think that abuse is only the physical aspect of it. They don't look at the financial, they don't look at the control, the sexual, and other things that's in there. But of course, we target it, and I think, as Representative said, we can get with the parents, get them trained, let them know that it's not about being your child's friend, it's about being a parent. I think we can eliminate a lot.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sabrina. I am the Executive Director for a nonprofit organization called Serve Familia. We have a services for Latinos. We serve, give or take, 4,000 Latinos in direct services every year. We do couples programs, we do parenting classes, we have a youth program. We have within our agency a domestic violence program called Georgia Latinos Against Domestic Violence, and we also provide mental health counseling both in Cobb and Gwinnett. I agree with Representative Mitchell and his concern about doing prevention work, because most of the work is done after the fact. We do a lot of that, through psychoeducational programs in the community, and also making sure that Latino victims are served in a culturally and linguistically proficient manner, which is a big problem right now. So very happy to be part of this effort.
Thank you. Let me say that one of the goals and the desires of the task force is to have the task force lobby in terms of utilizing resources, lobbying, helping with legislation to impart. Oftentimes we inject or infuse as leaders what we think women need, but it's important for them to tell us what we need so that we can give that to the legislators to help and assist with the writing of legislation, as well as networking, partnership, and training. So you mentioned curriculums, education, going into the school systems and helping with that, as well as bringing awareness and those types of things. Without any further ado, speaking of awareness, I'm going to invite Sheena Morris to share with us information regarding the fatality rate in Georgia and where we are concerning domestic violence in the state of Georgia. Thank you.
Want me to come up there?
Sure, absolutely.
I did bring fatality reviews for everyone. So if you don't have one, there are some on the chairs up front here. So right now, Georgia currently ranks 8th in the nation for the rate at which men murder women, many of which are domestic violence related homicides in the context of intimate partner violence. Additionally, African Americans made up 30.7% and roughly 31.5% of the Georgia population between 2010 and 2015, yet 55% of African American females were homicide victims in 2014. So you can see that there's a disproportionate rate at which African American women are dying here in the state of Georgia, which is directly connected to some of the work that the coalition is doing in hosting numerous community conversations in the Black and African American community right now, getting feedback around the needs of survivors who identify from these communities, and what may make things better for them to reach out for assistance. Some other statistics to share are that during the 2016 year, there were 5,390 survivors and their children which were sheltered. But there still remained 1,557 survivors and their children that were turned away from shelter due to the fact that there were not enough shelter beds. So again, we certainly notice that there is the need to fill a gap for survivors to access resources. Between 2010 and 2015, there were 529 Georgians who were murdered by a firearm in a domestic violence incident. To look at our 2016 fatality review report, I won't be able to speak as eloquently to the project as our fatality review project manager, Taylor Tabb. You can most certainly contact our organization if you have additional questions. But this year, the project looked at the connection between domestic violence and suicide. So of the 1,300 suicide cases identified by the Georgia Violent Death Reporting System in 2014, the project found that 20% included evidence from an intimate partner problem as a circumstance contributing to suicide. Per the report in 2016, there were a total of 121 domestic violence related fatalities. Now these are only fatalities that the project was able to capture, but many of us in this room know that the number is probably higher, but some of those fatalities were not actually captured via how, like you said, media may report different stories at times that they didn't necessarily relate them to being related to domestic violence. So we know that that number could potentially be much higher. So again, going back to the connection between domestic violence related homicides and suicides, in 62% of murder-suicide cases, the victim and perpetrator were no longer in a relationship together compared to the 33% in the reviewed homicide cases. So again, the project really delved into this dynamic around suicide and domestic violence related fatalities. And then again, going back to firearms, the project reported that firearms were used in 85% of murder-suicide cases reviewed by the project, nearly twice the rate of reviewed homicide cases which did not involve suicide. So again, making that connection between DV-related fatalities and suicide, which then also brought up issues around mental health and so on and so forth. And so you can find a number of those findings in this year's report, as well as recommendations for communities. And then Trish, did you want to add that one point?
About safety?
Yes.
And
itself. But when you look at the cases too, and we talk about our faith community and how important our faith community is to certain segments of the population, and in it was at least 1/3 or maybe more than that of the cases were of murder-suicide, the individual had previously reached out to their faith community for assistance. So it's extremely important that that community is engaged and to be able to address and speak to the issue of domestic violence, because those people are reaching out, and as I said, there's a need there somehow that is still not being met.
And this is also one of the key findings of our community engagement work that we have been doing with community conversations, that the faith community is a cornerstone of the community, and that it is often a place where survivors will turn to seek assistance. As well as we found some things around the language that is utilized in our movement in general around identifying survivors more so as victims, and how that language impacts the decision of certain folks identifying from particular communities, whether or not they come forward and disclose what they are experiencing. So,
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, we need to give them
That was good. That was good. Thank you for that. To piggyback on Sheena, the faith community is extremely important, and one of the things that we found in our research is that people are going from churches and telling you to go home and pray, or go home and read your Bible, or the woman is redeemed by her husband. And so it's extremely, I just can't reiterate it enough for the pastors that are a part of the Legislative Clergy Council, that you are informed and educated, because faith without works is dead, and there has to be a level of application. There has to be a getting out of the situation. There has to be a level of understanding and knowing what to do in crisis situation, and not just pray, because it's killing women. So one of the things we're proposing is that we connect with the churches and do a symposium, a big forum where the evangelists and the people who are part of their counseling ministries can come and get a resource directory. They'll leave with it, and we'll educate them on some of the things that they can do, some of the things that they can say, and where they can go and take women for help. But even in that, even in the curriculum that you mentioned earlier, and in having symposiums, etc., it all costs what? Money. Y'all quiet when we talk about money. Y'all was quiet before. But it all costs. And so one of the purposes for the advisory council is going to be to raise the money that we need. You mentioned in your report, Sheena, that there were 1,000 women that were displaced. So is that just good? Is that just okay? So for those 1,000 families that are displaced, what do? It costs money. So we're gonna have to have some additional money to be able to provide for those families that are in need. Yes, Ms. Casa?
I was just curious, you guys partner with hotels, right? Sometimes, the different people?
The local programs do, and I think probably Barbara can speak to that some.
We do, but unfortunately the funds are somewhat limited, so we
Yeah.
are able sometimes to help families if there's no space available in a program, and we can't advocate because there's no space available in neighboring programs. We are sometimes able to advocate or pay for hotels.
And then sometimes I think they're complicated, I guess, because you don't have as control of that environment.
That's exactly right. And the other piece of that is once a family goes to a hotel, you have other kinds of issues that you have to deal with: the transportation, if the kids are in school, how the family's going to eat, how they're going to get resources. You can't just dump a family in a hotel and then what will happen?
So is an answer more like literally building more shelters or transforming buildings into more shelters? Is that a vision?
Yeah, honestly, going back to what Representative Mitchell said, what I really think is the larger issue is to decide as a culture to abandon our value around violence. I mean, but what's really true is that we think that violence is okay if we have a good enough reason.
Sure.
Everybody thinks that.
Sure.
We're not admitting it. We think it's okay to lash out at somebody if they hurt your feelings. It's okay to hurt somebody. It's okay to go to war. It's okay to spank our children. Either violence is okay or it's not.
And then to add to that, and we are not necessarily hearing from survivors that they want to be displaced from their communities. They want to remain connected to their communities. They just want the violence to stop. Particularly when we talk about working with survivors from immigrant communities. The community is already very small and close-knit. They don't want to be disconnected from their communities many times.
So the prevention programs are more the thing as far as funding and those kind of
You know,
things.
can I also say it is also a piece about making sure that when we're talking about violence, when we're talking about domestic violence, that it isn't a subject that we have to talk about in hushed tones. If we make it a conversation that this is an epidemic, violence in our society, as Barbara was saying too, and domestic violence in particular is an epidemic, and that we don't have just conversations about it when we're in groups like this, that it is a conversation when we're talking to our children, when we're talking about taking this into schools, which some programs have a difficult time in getting into schools in their area to talk about domestic violence, that this is not a taboo subject, that this is something that we talk about in every arena and every opportunity where we have the chance.
And the intersections between other social justice related issues, because again, going back to some of the work we've been doing in communities, we've heard from these communities, how can we even begin to have the conversation around domestic violence when our communities in general are not healthy, right? So how can we even start to talk about violence?
Wow. There's something that maybe we are not taking into account, because normally we say that we have 1,000 or so women that are displaced. We are not talking about certain communities in which women don't go to a shelter, period.
Right.
You know, you have a Latino woman or maybe an Asian American woman, they will go to a friend's house, a family member's house, so they are not, when we count numbers, we are not counting that numbers. And it is a fact that domestic violence sadly is more prevalent in the Latino community than it is in other communities. Now that we are, hands in, many of the safe houses don't have a bilingual advocate, period. And when you go to a meeting and talk to them, because we have been doing a lot of education, they say, oh, we cannot find one. They are not looking for one, and that's the truth. And then, most of the communities, they don't have mental health counseling services in Spanish, period. Not even the community service boards, which are mandated by law to provide mental health in their counties, they don't have anybody that speaks Spanish. Probably from all the service boards in the metro area, I think only one of them has services in Spanish. So it ends up in smaller agencies like ours that we only have 4 providers, but for every person we open a space, we have 3 waiting. So there's no way, and we are triaging, the most severe cases first. But the issues that the Latino community has with suicide attempts and domestic violence are completely flooding agencies like ours.
What we're finding nationally is that the requests or needs or desire for people actually going into a domestic violence shelter are decreasing. What people really want is to be able to stay in their communities, to be able to help heal their communities, and for their communities to be accountable, or for their batterers to be accountable to their communities. And so people really, really want to be able to figure this out at a community level so that they don't have to leave, and so that they can get help for their partner, so that they can stay safe in their home. And so we're really, really finding nationally that requests and the need and desire for shelter are really decreasing, and have for about the last 15 years, really decreased significantly. And so what we need is more community resources and really help to lift those up. Like the folks that you are involved in with the Taskforce, those really kind of local grassroots folks to say, hey, you can't do this to her, and we're gonna hold you accountable for it. In our community, and that makes a big difference when people, when they get their eyes on them in the community and they're saying, hey, what you're doing is not okay, and what are you doing about it, that hurts. That hurts.
Next question.
So we were talking about curriculums and prevention. So for the past year, I've been studying and researching and gathering information, and I created a curriculum specifically for churches, right? I was a domestic violence victim. Went to the church and I was told to go home and pray, and really felt like the church really let me down, so I left the church. Finally went back a few years later, but because I feel like if you're not educated, you don't know what you don't know. So I spent the last year gathering information, taking classes, and I created this curriculum for churches. They don't even want it.
You know what I mean? So it's like, how do you even get in the church to say, hey, you really need this? They don't want it. A lot of the churches are like, well, you know, we don't have the budget. I'm not even asking you for any money. I just want to get in the church so that no one ever has to go through what I went through. Because going home to pray and holy oil and all that, counseling together, you're not supposed to counsel victims and the abuser together. So a lot of that is happening. What happens when you're sitting in the count and your being counseled, he or she becomes the perfect spouse at that moment. And so, spent the whole year creating this content, and I can't even get it in the churches.
I want to respond to that. That's one of the reasons that we're having a platform with the larger churches. And I will say that in the church environment, the churches has its own culture as well. And it's cliquish, just like government, just like every entity has a sect and a way of being. And so in order to get into that culture, you have to know somebody, you have to be connected to somebody, or you have to be a certain title or of a certain affluence. I think with the Legislative Clergy Council and with the National Taskforce that we can bring those pastors to the table that may not entertain your curriculum, because we can share with them the stats that this is what's happening, and it's happening on your watch in your church.
Yeah, I've had churches that
many first ladies are even going through it. So it's something that I think we can help you with. So let's work together on that. We will put together a symposium to help churches. The other thing you mentioned is a culture of violence. I understand and I believe that to be true, but we have to be very careful, because when you have a president who has been accused of fondling women and he still was able to get in office, but then you want to say we have a culture of violence, is synonymous with where we are. So what's happening in our homes is synonymous with what's going on in government. And so with that being said, it's going to take the local agencies, it's going to take the task force to touch people, because we cannot put the responsibility back on a people who may not even see you or value you as a woman. And so we can't change that culture, but what we can do is go into the churches, go into the neighborhoods, go into the schools, and hold the school boards accountable, and hold the people accountable, and hold the legislators accountable, and hold the pastors accountable. We can do that. Yes? I think as a task force we can do that. But in terms of the culture, that it's so broad and there's so much work to be done, because it's a culture that is accepted. It's accepted. You wanted to make a statement, and then right after her, I'm going to introduce or bring to the platform the Honorable former legislator, many years as a chairman, has a plethora of knowledge, wisdom, and experience. The legislators know him here. Yes, he does, right? And so we want to hear what he has to say. We have a solution to some of the notification that is being, that the women are not being notified. We think that if everybody had a way of being notified that was systematic, that it would be more helpful to the women knowing when the accuser or the convicted has been released. So I'm going to bring him to the panel right after Ms. Felisa makes her comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment on the church education of churches. We have for 2-3 years now, we have been delivering 2 presentations. One of them is domestic violence in the Latino and African American communities, bringing those communities together, because there are many similarities in how violence occurs in both cultures. And the also is domestic violence for faith leaders. But what we have found, your approach I think is perfect. What we have done is going the other way around, coming from members of the community, then going up until then maybe the pastor, the priest, whoever listens of what's going in the community, and then they are all in, because most of the community or part of the community has already been educated.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that would be a great way from the outside. When you're inside, it's a little easier, because if we can pick up the phone and call pastors, you're going to get a better response. And they know it's happening. A lot of times it's just so much that they have to deal with. They may not know how they can engage, and by the time it gets up the ladder, it may not even get to the pastor. So you could be getting turned away with him not, or her not even being aware of that information. Without any further ado, please receive the Honorable Min Harden.
served for 20 years in the legislature, and I moved over from government relations to lobbying, which means I know very little about a whole lot. But I'm here today more specifically to speak about one of our clients, APRIS. APRIS does victims notification, and they also do prescription drug monitoring programs, but I won't talk about that one today. There's a little information on the Vine network. I'll tell you about APRIS. Emily Staples, who was our client, who was my direct contact with our client, could not be here. She apologizes. She is traveling. Normally, if I need to get her in the state, it takes months to plan it. So, but she does apologize. She asked me to give a brief overview of what they do, because what they do stems from what you do. APRIS started in 1996. A young lady was stalked in Louisville, Kentucky, and she had the young man arrested. The young man was booked, sent to jail, and was out pretty quickly as he bonded out. Unfortunately, at the time, the young lady did not know, before this man had gone in, he had made a commitment to her that he was going to kill her. But he went to jail. As I said, he bonded out, he came out. And 2 weeks later, in a mall parking lot, on her birthday, he killed her in her car. He made a commitment. The family, stunned as they were because they lost their little girl, said, we got to do something about this. And so they met with a guy who was the founder and current CEO of APRIS, and they created a system, technology system, to where victims are notified if there's any change in custody when that person is taken in. Not just when they're convicted, but even if they're accused. Because this young man had not been convicted yet, but he was accused. But he made a promise to her. And unfortunately, he was able to fulfill it because they didn't know he was out. So APRIS decided to start a program, and they did, called Vine. Vine is very successful. They were 41 states across the country on a statewide system. 48 states on partial system. Here in Georgia, they're in 7 counties. Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, Gwinnett, Forsyth, Cherokee, and Clark. And so they touch about 44% of the inmate population. But the problem they have is it's not a statewide system. So we are working, meeting with stakeholders across the state, trying to create a statewide system. Because today, if someone is arrested and they go into the Fulton County Jail, they're arrested for domestic violence or whatever they're arrested for, and the victim signs up for the program, Vine is notifying them any way they want to be notified, whether it's a telephone call, if it's TTY for your death, email, text, letter. Because some people don't want you bothering them, just send me a letter. The victim gets to decide how they want to be notified. If they want to be notified, because still in this day and age, some victims don't want to know. But those that want to be notified, they can be notified. The problem is, if they're in Fulton County or Gwinnett or Cobb or any of those other 7 counties that I mentioned, when they get transferred, they are convicted. If they move to a state facility, it's a whole new system. And the state system is not to knock it, they are working on it, but it's not as good as Vine. And that's why Vine is in 41 states. Just a few years ago, I'll give you an example of what happened in Alabama. Alabama had APRIS in the entire state. It was a great system, it was working well, but APRIS, as most people tend to do, we all think, I can do better. Yeah, this is good, I can do better and save money. I'll probably get a promotion. Things are gonna be well. So they kicked APRIS out. About 3 years later, they called them back and said, we can't do this. We've spent several $1 million. We aren't as effective. We cannot do it the way you do it. So APRIS came back in, worked with them, put together an RFP, and APRIS won that RFP earlier this year. They're back in statewide now. Because they've shown that they know how to do this. They're effective, they're lower cost, very efficient. And the most important thing in all of this is the victims you need to notify. So I think that's why you see the success that they've had in Gwinnett and Fulton and all these counties. The people that work with them will tell you the Vine system is great. Because what we all know, what y'all do, you're on that, you're trying your best to make sure this never happens. And that's the goal of all of us, is that it never happens. Unfortunately, it does. When it does, that victim has every right to know what has happened to that person. That's all we want to do, is make sure that they are able to be notified and that person is moved wherever they go. That's an overview. That is a 50,000-foot overview. Emily will be glad if you have questions of her down the road, or anyone can come here. If you have questions, I can try to answer them and get you an answer. And I will open up to that. But I want to say thank you for what you do every day. Because what you do is what is trying to family members, whether it's dealing with a drug situation against creative violence, or just an anger situation, or as someone pointed out earlier, we tend to all be angrier today. I don't get that. We're blessed. Every day that we wake up in this country, we're blessed. I don't understand the anger. It's something I hope we can work with, but until we fix it, let's make sure the victim's notified and y'all keep doing what you're doing to try to stop it. I'll take a few questions if you have them.
Yes. Go right ahead.
Just so that, if I recall correctly, Vine notifies victims on the local level release as well, like so local jails, municipality jails as well, whereas the statewide system only notifies around like state prisons.
So.
Yeah.
And that's, but in the 41 states where Vine is the system, they notify them where they are.
Across the board,
It's that
right.
seamless, and that's what we hope to get to here. That way, if they go into a municipal jail, then they go to the state, that victim is still notified, and they don't have to go fill out anything else.
That's right.
Thank you for that question.
Ben, I want to thank you for the long history of trying to make Georgia better, done an extraordinary job.
I had good years of having a down budget, so it was really
Who pays for this? How's this? What's the mechanism to pay for this?
And what talks about on the back, it's paid for through the state. There are VOCA funds, which is Victims of Crime Act funding. And you see here, I did not bring that up. Georgia's funding has gone up about threefold. And so the money is available, and that can be utilized to help pay for this. This part is charged on a per inmate cost. There's an upfront cost, but it's a per inmate cost because you're monitoring them. The thing about this system, because they have 41 states, if Georgia were to join in, you have 42 states. Any one of those 42 states, they can tell you about any one of those inmates that fall under their system, or any one of those accused that fall under their system. So the victim can be notified if they happen to be moved out of state. Let's say that happened here, but they needed to be extradited somewhere else. They still are able to keep up with it. And that's what makes this system so good.
I see you make a reference to pardon and parole. I had a constituent contact me once about they were not aware of a hearing for a particular accused or incarcerated individual that was coming up for pardon and paroles, which they would have liked to have participated or sent information. Will Vine do that as well?
Yes. Once,
Okay.
if they're part of the system, once part of the paroles, you have statewide
And it's
system.
got a hearing.
Part of the paroles does a good job considering what they have to do. They have a lot of things to keep up with. Unfortunately, as I pointed out earlier, government, or I want to say this, government can do certain things and they do it well. There's certain things that they just can't do. This is one where you've got the expertise and the efficiencies, the effectiveness that can be provided right here. Pardons and paroles working with them, Department of Corrections working with them, district attorneys, sheriff's association. We've met with all of these people trying to get right into it. With all of them working with Vine, they get notified regardless of what happens. Any change in custody triggers a notification to that victim. And some victims don't sign up. You can have a closed system to where only the victim of the crime signs up. Bring them an open system where anyone can sign up to know what happened, change in custody. And it just depends. Some states are closed, some are open. But yes, in your situation, if that victim's been signed up, and Vine had been the one managing all of this, they would have been notified at the beginning.
Last question for me. How can I help to get this statewide?
Right now, we are working with the stakeholders. We're hoping to have a meeting sometime over the summer. And once we have that meeting, after we have that meeting, we're gonna need people just calling and lobbying and explaining why this is necessary. But just get it. This can be done through, let me back up. Don't commit myself, after 20 years, you don't commit yourself too quick. It might require some, but overall, right now, we think it can be done just through regulation. It's just getting all the departments to work together, and they sign the contract using the VOCA funds, and we're ready to go. And then they're all just communicating back to Vine, and Vine gets everything out on that. They don't have to tell anybody, any victims, they just have to tell Vine. Vine does all the rest.
So, Ben, so in the way I'm understanding it is all these other counties, we have 159 counties, 7 have the system, the rest don't, 152.
Right.
They're just doing it manually, or do they have the other
It
counties?
varies. That's the problem.
It all varies.
Some are
Yeah.
manual, some are, they may have a little system set up where they get an automatic phone call. It just varies by county. There are 152 counties that aren't using Vine. But of those 7, like I said, that's 44%. So they're in the larger counties. But you still, unfortunately, there are victims out there that aren't being notified.
Well, it seems unfair for Metro Atlanta County's victims to have access to better notification systems than the rural Georgia, that doesn't seem to be fair.
That's the same opinion we have, that everyone deserves to be notified.
I mean, at least the same system, you know.
Be in the same system, some part of the process, and we offer that solution. We're talking with them, and we're trying to be very patient with them, because this is new, and you're trying to get people to bend from something they've done in the past, and it's difficult. But I think as they see what we do, and see what's happening in other states, that they're starting to realize it just makes too much sense.
How long would it take if they had agreed? How long would that take to implement? Like, could it be?
Once everybody signs up, I think, it says it in here, I think it's 6 months.
Wow.
Within 6 months, everybody's up and running and connected.
They just have to train everybody in the different local.
Well, really, it's just notifying them where they notify. It's not really a lot of training. It's just you make sure the notification goes here. Mine takes care of the rest. Because they have the people all over the country, 3,600 sites. So they're keeping up with everything all over the country. If that victim has signed up, however they've signed up or whatever notification they want, they get that notification immediately.
So you said there are 7 counties. So what did those particular counties do different? Was there funding at the county level that you guys were able to do those agreements? Because if you're moving to expanding, so I'm just curious, how did the 7 get engaged versus the others?
I'm not exactly sure, but
Okay.
I think it varies. Some of them were able to utilize local funds. Some of them just use local funds.
Okay.
Because they were probably, what's happened, I think with a lot of those counties, they were doing their own system and realized it just wasn't working. When you break down the dollars, I think they'll see that mine actually is probably more cost effective than what they're spending today.
Gotcha.
And so I think that was what mine was making that decision. Because these are large counties. Again, it's 44% of the inmates that you're touching just for the 7. But the problem is when they leave and go to the state facility, that 44% falls off the mine system.
I got you. Thank you.
If we can get a statewide, then the counties still have to come on board, but typically it's much easier for them to come on board. Any other questions? Thank y'all again for what you do. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with y'all in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Emily, who works with Ben, as he said, she's the representative for Vine System. She mentioned that the monies, actually, some have them come from VOCA, but primarily that the inmates pay for it by using the phone. So they take some of that commissary money and they put it on the system. So it's not that the state has to fund it. And with that being said, then it would be no other reason for the state not to have it, because it's not being funded by the state. So why would we not provide a system that makes it better for women to be notified? And Casas, again, as Billy mentioned, is the wife of Representative Casas, but she also is an advocate and an activist. She's the state director for Marcy's Law. But can you explain to them, Jessica Flowers, there's a woman in Macon who was not notified, and tell them about that story and how the DA said, oh, it takes us 30 days to notify her, so now she's dead in 8. Can you tell them what happened?
Yeah, it's Bridget Flowers. You guys have seen her on your reports. And I think the issue is just consistency. I think whether it's the Vine system or whatever notification system, or the fact that Georgia's only one of 14 states now that doesn't give constitutional rights to crime victims. We just passed in Oklahoma just a couple weeks ago. I think the issue is consistency. And so when you have a law, but it's not, you can take a law, but you can apply it, you can interpret it kind of different ways. And so you can say, I gotta give a notification, but how does that look? What does that look like? I mean, you don't have teeth into it. You know, somebody in Macon can get a different type of notification or not get notification. People in Gwinnett or Atlanta are gonna be ready. So Bridget was beat up by her husband in Walmart, knocked out. The very next day he got out on bond. She wasn't notified of the bond hearing. She wasn't able to be present. She probably wasn't even physically able, but he was already out on parole. He had been serving a life sentence. He was allowed to release on parole. So he's out on parole, beats her up, is put into jail. The next day he gets out on a no contact bond, but she wasn't allowed to be present. He should have been held, but there was no hold put on in the notification system. So there's like kind of 2 fails right there. And then after he got out, she figured out he got out because he kept calling her, telling her, I'm gonna find you and kill you. And she didn't know her rights. She wasn't told that all she had to do, but she wasn't at the bond hearing, so she wasn't told, hey, he called you, you pick up the phone, we'll lock him back up. She didn't know anything that she could do. And so she's thinking, this guy, there's really no power. He finds her on day 8, he finds her sitting in the van with her kids. Like there's like 5 people in the car, her daughter and son. He shoots her, kills her daughter. He keeps shooting in the car. She has to take her mother's body, move her mother's body to the seat, and drive this car away to get away from this guy. He follows them and he's shooting at them. I mean, this is, you think 18-year-old girl, her dead mother's body, she's moving and just completely traumatized. And then he keeps shooting and he shot 2 other people in the car. So he's in jail and he's permanently in jail. But the news report when they were talking to them, and it's not, we don't make it a criticism of the system. I think there's just some flaws. We can do better. And they said in the report, well, it takes 30 days for the file. I couldn't give a notification because it takes 30 days for the file to get from this place to this place. And then especially in a domestic violence situation, that's just insane. You should be notified immediately. You should know your rights immediately. So there's a lot of best practices that needs to be played out, but that's a worst case scenario. But there's a lot of situations like Tanika's, even when he got out, when her ex got out, she had a TPO and he got out and she didn't even know. I think she went to show a house and he pretended.
I was a real estate agent back then, and he had just gone to jail, literally tried to kill me a few days before, and I was showing a property, didn't know he was out. He pretended to be the client, called the real estate company, hey, I want to see this property, so I get there early to do my walkthrough, and he walks in and attacked me. I had no idea he was out. I probably wouldn't even have, I was already afraid to go out and show the property, but had I known or been notified that he was out, I probably wouldn't have done it alone. I hadn't sold a house since then. That was in 2007. I let that career go because I just post-traumatic stress disorder. It just makes me nervous. I'm nervous for other girls as well.
So I think the issue is, you're talking about people not wanting to report, but no one's going to want to report if they think that the person's going to get out and they're not going to be notified and they're not going to have the ability to prepare themselves. And so a lot of people, I think, don't trust the system to protect them. And I think that's part of, at least what I've seen lately, is that you're going into court not on the same level as him. He has way more rights than you have. And they're going to make sure to protect his rights, because if you violate them, they're constitutional rights and you can't violate them. But you can violate the victim's rights all you want, and there's nothing the victim can do about it. They cannot enforce it. You have no rights. You have a hope that they're going to enforce that. And if I was a victim in South Georgia, especially, without knowing it, I would feel completely insecure.
Wow.
So I think I think it's just an overall system thing where we need to maybe try to just bring Georgia up to date. If we're one of 14 states that doesn't have this, and we're 1 of 9 that doesn't have a universal notification system,
Right.
we're behind. And so that's my speech.
No,
I just wanted to echo the same thing, that I think Vine offers us accountability. And if you don't have Vine, this situation with Bridget Flowers happened in Macon, which is not far. But for those 7 counties that have it and they're doing fine, what about there are 100 and how many? 59? 100 in Georgia. That means that there is no accountability in those other areas. And if you're trying to get resources outside of the major city of Atlanta, what do you do? So we have to look for not just what's happening in our neck of the woods, but we have to be accountable and help women who need resources in those other areas, in those urban areas as well. The other thing I wanted to, I'll let you go and then I'll finish off with that last one.
I just wanted to ask a question going back to the funding, this Victims of Crime Act funding. Do those funds go into the general budget, or is that a restricted fund when it comes to the state?
They are restricted because they have to go towards certain things. It's like your Medicaid dollars. Anything typically from the federal government is restricted and has to go towards a certain process. So they could use it for their own system. And I think some of those funds are being used for that today. It's just not as effective and it's not really efficient the way they're doing it.
So you said something, question for me. does Georgia have to apply for these funds? Do they automatically come to Georgia, and do we know which department controls that budget?
It's through,
You said yes, you know, or?
it's through the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council,
Okay.
CJCC, which
Okay.
Jay Neal Operate is the director.
Okay.
And he's been very good, we've met with him, and they allocate the funds.